Hello everyone and welcome to Autistic Changeling. Today I'm going to talk about structure, organization, patterns, routines and rituals, that kind of thing. I'm going to talk about it all in one video because I think it's all related and connected. So here we go. So a lot of, not all of course, but a lot of autistic people have a tendency towards routine, ritual, maybe a greater tolerance for repetitiveness than most Autistics have. And this can manifest in a wide variety of ways. I think the diagnostic criteria only specifically mentions routines and rituals, but there's a lot of other ways that this can look as well. And like I said, not every autistic person has this trait because not every autistic person will have every single autistic trait out there. And some neurotypicals may have traits that seem similar to this, but aren't autistic. But in general, a lot of autistic people have this particular set of traits. So I'm just going to talk about each thing a little bit. So routines are, I think, maybe one of the things that people think about a lot, and people tend to imagine that it's like you do the same thing every single day at the same time in like a very, very strict routine. Personally, I don't do that. I don't think it's quite that obvious for most people. I mean, it might be for some, but it's not like, you know, in a movie where they do that whole display montage of like the person following the exact same thing every day, because life doesn't allow for that. And I think routines and rituals are more likely to show up in the sense of not every single part of your life, but some specific things. You know, little rituals are one that might come up, and that's just little things that you do that don't really serve a practical purpose. Like, for example, I have this thing, I think I must have originated. You know, when I make coffee, sometimes there's little grounds that end up in there and they'll like float to the top. And you just kind of scoop them out with your spoon and put them in the sink, or at least that's what I do. So I'm pretty sure that that's how this started. But even if there aren't any little grounds in my coffee, I'll still take a spoon and I'll scoop up just a little bit of the coffee and put it in the sink. And I don't have any practical reason for doing that, but I do that whenever I can when I make coffee. Stuff like that. And there's other examples. Those are little rituals. Routines is more like if you do the same thing every day at a specific time or every week or something like that. And it doesn't have to apply to your entire life, you know. Now, I don't have routines as much as the other aspects of how this manifests, so I can't talk about that too much, but I suspect that most people don't have, you know, the exact same day every day. It's more like parts of your day that you repeat, or a specific action has to occur on a specific day or something like that. So that's one way that this can manifest, but there are other ways in which that same sort of a tendency towards structure and patterns can manifest itself. And I think that it helps to consider why we do this. And I think that to some extent it's because it simplifies the processing of information. And one of the main characteristics of autistic people is that there are differences in information processing. You know, that's why we have sensory issues and stimming. And I think that that sort of is where this comes in as well, because if you can put a pattern to something consciously or unconsciously, then it's easier to process that information. So I think that's part of it, but obviously not all of it, because not all of the things that we do actually, you know, make it easier to process information. Like the spoon with my coffee, that doesn't really like make it easier to process anything, but it does give a sense of familiarity to the day to do the same thing over and over so that you know something. It's like a little anchor, I guess. And this is on a subconscious level, I think, for the most part. So I wanted to talk about that. But like I said, there's other ways in which this tendency towards order and repetitiveness can manifest. And I think, I don't know if this is the technical term for it, but like black and white thinking is definitely one thing that I know some autistics can struggle with. It's generally just the tendency to put everything into categories of, one thing or another thing, and you can logically know that not everything is going to fit into a nice ordered structure of the world, but that doesn't make it less frustrating that it doesn't go that way. It's like there should be a right answer, and everything should fit together logically, and not everything does, which is really frustrating. And I think this is something which a lot of Autistics also struggle with, to be honest. I think this is a trait that is associated with a lot of other types of neurodivergencies as well, and probably something that some neurotypicals also struggle with. Because it's just a thing that the world is like. And so in addition to that, I think Autistics have a higher tolerance for repetitiveness than most Allistics do. And I think this ties in. So special interests are definitely a big way that Autistics have a higher tolerance for repetitiveness. You can watch the same episode from a special interest multiple times, or just engage with or talk about the thing over and over. But this also shows up with food sometimes. If a person has sensory issues, then they might have a tendency to stick with a particular food that they really like or that they know they can handle and eat that same food over and over. And that can play into routines and be part of a routine that you eat that food. And that can make it harder if you want to eat something else, but it also provides you with something that you can eat. And that's just an example. So things like that, higher tolerances for repetitiveness, or even a positive reaction from repetitiveness, finding the repetitiveness comforting rather than annoying, is an autistic trait. Patterns and pattern recognition is another thing. That's also sort of a stereotype where people will assume that autistics are very good at recognizing patterns and have it's something that shows up sometimes, like the superpower autistic savant kind of characters. So it's not like that for all people or even most people, but there is, I think, a tendency towards finding patterns, or searching for patterns or making things into patterns. I have a tendency to organize objects if they're just around. A funny story about this is my mom and I were staying at a hotel once, and I showered first and then she showered, and she came out of the shower and she was like, "What were you doing in there?" And I didn't know what she meant, but apparently when I put the shampoo and the conditioner and the little bottle of body wash that the hotel provides you, I'd organized them into this perfect little triangle in the corner. And that's not something that most people do, apparently. So, I just like to have things neatly arranged and organized, and I like the structure and the patterns. And I think this is something that most people enjoy. That's why you have those pictures of things organized neatly and whatnot, but I think there's a greater tendency for autistic people to organize things into those patterns. And that's also something that I think shows up in some stereotypes, like the autistic kid lining up trucks or whatever, but there is some basis to that, I think. And last, I want to talk about changes to routines. So I think it's a thing that happens, of course, that not everything goes according to plan, and sometimes a routine will have to change. And I think there's a tendency for people to assume that autistics just can't handle change of any kind. And it's sort of hard to predict sometimes when a change might be bothersome, or how bothersome it will be, and it depends entirely on the person, I think, for the most part. I can say that change bothers me, but it's not usually enough to cause a meltdown unless something else is bothering me as well. It can be the last straw, but if I'm feeling perfectly fine and then something happens, it's probably not going to cause a meltdown. Those will be in a separate video. I haven't talked about them yet, but I will. But it's something that can contribute to stress. So let me see some examples. Duolingo recently changed their system, and the stress of the whole thing changing is just too much, and I'm not using that right now because trying to use it now that they've changed it is just too much work for my brain to process how the new system works, and it's just not happening. So I'm dealing with that problem by ignoring it. But sometimes you can't just ignore the thing that has changed. So if someone has to cancel plans at the last minute, or if at the last minute your job decides to move you somewhere else, or something like that, that can be a really big stressor. And I think the most important thing for me that helps reduce that stress is just knowing about it in advance. And having time to mentally prepare myself for it. Even if there aren't any practical preparations that need to be made, even if I can't do anything about it, knowing about it in advance and giving myself time to actually process that really helps. Because for me, one of the main reasons that sudden changes to plans bother me is that when I think about the future and my plans for things, it all has to fit together, and when something suddenly changes from that mental picture I have of how things are going to go, then it's like the whole thing starts to collapse and unravel, and I don't know how to conceptualize the future without that piece. So if I have the time to reconceptualize how things are going to go and to know what to expect, that really helps me. So I know I said that was the last thing I was going to talk about, but quickly. I also think scripting sort of plays into this a little. I don't remember if I've talked about it or not, but scripting is basically where an autistic person has a script for a particular social situation. A good example of this is greetings, hello, how are you, I'm fine, and you, etc., that kind of thing. And it's not always an actual script that you have memorized, although some people do that. It can also just be, the order of events that you have in your head of how to get through a social interaction. And it's a lot more intentional with autistic people than with non-autistic people. But scripting is also something that people can pick up by accident, I think, as well. And that's also sort of playing into the patterns and pattern recognition and using those patterns to get through a situation. So I think I've touched on a lot of the various topics here that I wanted to talk about. I'm sure I'll remember something I missed. If you have any comments, questions, you can put them in the comments down below. And I hope you have a great day.